What girl? Those were the first words out of his mouth when police found him standing knee-deep in a swamp. His left wrist sliced open, blood mixing with the murky water. They had asked him about the missing 5-year-old girl, the one whose disappearance had triggered an Amber Alert across Minnesota, the one whose father he called a friend, the one he had taken from her bedroom just hours before. What girl? As if he didn't know, as if he hadn't driven 80 miles with her in a stolen truck, as if he hadn't left a suicide note on the kitchen table of his family's cabin, as if her pink Princess Elsa blanket wasn't lying in that same swamp just yards away, covering what remained of her innocence. Today, we're heading to Watkins, Minnesota, to a case that shattered a small town's sense of safety and exposed the terrifying truth that sometimes the monster isn't a stranger hiding in the shadows. Sometimes the monster is sitting at your kitchen table, drinking beer with your husband, playing on your softball team, spending the night in your home. Alayna Ertl was 5 years old when a man her family trusted took her from her bed in the middle of the night. She would be found dead before sunset, her body submerged in a swamp. Her cause of death, strangulation, her small body bearing evidence of sexual assault. This is the story of a community's worst nightmare, a family's unimaginable loss, and a predator who hid in plain sight. Before we dive into this haunting story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe every child's story deserves to be told, don't forget to hit subscribe, because tomorrow we uncover another case that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Welcome to Missing Case Network. To understand what happened to Alayna Ertl, you have to understand the place she called home. Watkins, Minnesota is a town of fewer than 1,000 people, nestled in Meeker County, about 70 miles northwest of Minneapolis. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where children ride their bikes in sidewalks without fear, where neighbors wave to each other from their porches and help each other during harvest season. There are no stoplights in Watkins. The main street is lined with small businesses, a funeral home, a bar called Gordy's, a Catholic church that has served the community for generations. The houses are modest, with well-kept lawns and American flags flying from front porches. This is farm country, central Minnesota, where the seasons dictate the rhythm of life, where Friday nights are for high school football and adult softball leagues, where trust is extended freely, because that's simply how things are done. The Ertl family was woven into this community. Matt Ertl worked at a local business and played on an adult softball team called the River Rats, sponsored by a local tavern. His wife, Kayla, was involved in community activities and volunteered at Eden Valley Watkins Elementary School. They had 2 children, their son Carter, who was 8, and their daughter Alayna, who had just turned 5. The previous Halloween, Alayna Ertl was born on October 31st, 2010, a Halloween baby who brought joy and light into every room. She entered her family, called her Lainey, and her nickname was Peanut. She had completed preschool at Eden Valley Watkins Elementary and was supposed to start kindergarten in just 2 weeks. By all accounts, Alayna was the kind of child who made the world brighter. She had a smile that never seemed to fade, and kind words for everyone she met. She was bubbly and giggly. Once she felt comfortable, though somewhat bashful. At first, around strangers, she loved animals, loved singing, loved dressing up as a princess. Her daily life revolved around simple joys, swinging a hula hoop around her small frame, riding her bicycle on the sidewalks outside her tan-sided house, playing with the go-kart type vehicles her father built for the kids, following around her older cousin whom she adored. She loved learning from her brother Carter, and always gave the best hugs her family would later write in her obituary. She was an animal lover, a princess, a singer, a great friend to everyone she met, and was our peanut. A neighbor who gave Alayna haircuts would later tell reporters, "I've never seen her unhappy." Alayna would come into her parents' bedroom every morning to give them a kiss. Good morning, and make sure everybody else was okay. Her mother Kayla recalled, "She was our little mama, always taking care of everyone." This was the child who went to sleep on Friday, August 19th, 2016, not knowing that a monster was in her house, not knowing that her life would end before the weekend was over. To understand the horror of what happened, we must examine the man responsible. Zachary Todd Anderson was 25 years old in August 2016. He lived in Coon Rapids, Minnesota, though some records also associate him with Monticello. In the same state, he worked at a local business alongside Matt Ertl, which is how the two men became friends. Anderson and the Ertl family had developed what appeared to be a genuine friendship through their shared workplace and community activities. They played on the same adult softball team. The River Rats, which was sponsored by a local tavern, they regularly socialized after games at Riverside Tavern in Watkins. Anderson had previously stayed overnight at the Ertl home. During such outings, it wasn't unusual for friends to crash at each other's houses after a night of drinking rather than drive home. This indicated a level of trust within the friendship, the kind of trust that small-town communities are built on when police first investigated. Anderson, following Alayna's disappearance, his criminal record showed little more than minor traffic violations. There was nothing in his official history that would have warned the Ertl family about the danger they were inviting into their home. But there was a history, one that had been sealed, one that told a very different story about who Zachary Anderson really was. In May 2006, when Anderson was just 15 years old, he lived in a townhouse with his mother in Monticello, Minnesota, according to court documents released by Wright County. After Alayna's murder, Anderson had targeted one of his neighbors that summer. The neighbor was a 31-year-old woman who lived next door with her young children. Anderson began leaving love notes on her car, asking if she wanted a boyfriend. Leaving his phone number, the woman initially laughed it off as the behavior of a stupid teenager. But the behavior escalated. The notes became more frequent, more insistent. Anderson began watching her coming and going, tracking her movements. Then one night, he broke into her home while she slept upstairs. The details of what happened that night were sealed in juvenile court records. But the outcome was clear. Anderson was convicted of criminal behavior. As a juvenile, he would have faced charges that, as an adult, might have flagged him in. Background checks might have warned people about who he really was. But because he was 15, because the system is designed to give young offenders second chances, those records were sealed. Anderson emerged from the juvenile justice system with what appeared to be a clean slate. The woman he had targeted in 2006 spoke to reporters after Alayna's murder in 2016. Now that everything has happened, I look back, and it makes everything look so much more creepy. She said she had recognized Anderson's name when the Amber Alert was issued, recognized it, and felt a chill run down her spine. She had always wondered whether she was his only victim, whether, in the decade between her assault and Alayna's murder, there had been others. I hope it may encourage others to step forward, she told reporters, saying, "It is hard to believe Anderson did not target other women or children. in the decade between her incident and the killing of Alayna Ertl. But, as far as investigators could determine, no one else came forward. Zachary Anderson had apparently spent 10 years controlling whatever urges drove him, waiting, watching, appearing normal to everyone around him, until the night of August 19, 2016, that Friday evening, started like any other. For the River Rats softball team, they had a game scheduled, and Matt Ertl and Zachary Anderson both played. Anderson and Matt were friends, teammates, co-workers. The kind of casual male friendship built on shared activities and Friday night beers after the game. The team headed to Riverside Tavern in Watkins to celebrate or commiserate, depending on the outcome. This was routine. This was what they always did. Anderson arrived at the tavern around 10:30 p.m. with Matt and Kayla Ertl. According to court documents, Anderson consumed 2 beers over the course of about 2 hours, not enough to claim intoxication, not enough to explain away what would happen next. Sometime after midnight, Matt and Kayla headed home. With Anderson following, they arrived at the Ertl residence on Guidos Meeker Street, where the children Carter and Alayna were sleeping. Matt and Anderson continued talking in the way that friends do. After a night out at approximately 2 a.m., Kayla Ertl checked on her daughter. Alayna had fallen asleep on the couch. So Kayla carried her to her bedroom, tucked her in, made sure her pink Princess Elsa blanket was covering her, kissed her goodnight. This would be the last time Kayla would see her daughter alive. Matt and Anderson continued talking until approximately 4 a.m. When Matt finally went to bed exhausted from the long day and the late night, Anderson, who had stayed at the Ertl home before on similar occasions, was expected to sleep on the couch or in a spare room. The Ertls trusted him. They had no reason not to, but Zachary Anderson did not go to sleep at some point between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. Anderson made his move. He went to Alayna's bedroom, where the 5-year-old was sleeping peacefully. He took her from her bed. Perhaps she was still asleep. Perhaps she woke, and he told her some story to keep her quiet. We will never know exactly what happened in those first moments. What we know is that Anderson took Alayna. He took her father's 2002 white GMC Sierra pickup truck, which had the keys in it. He took Matt's cell phone, which was inside the truck, and he drove north at approximately 8:00 a.m. on Saturday, August 20th, 2016. Matt and Kayla Ertl woke to discover their world had shattered. Alayna's bed was empty. Her pink blanket was gone. Their daughter was gone. Zachary Anderson was also gone. The friend, who had been sleeping in their home, had vanished, and so had Matt's truck with his cell phone inside. The initial moments must have been confusion, mixed with growing horror. Perhaps Alayna had woken early. Perhaps Anderson had taken her for breakfast. Perhaps there was some innocent explanation. But as the minutes ticked by, as calls to Anderson's phone went unanswered, as no one could explain where the 5-year-old and the 25-year-old man had gone, the horror crystallized into certainty. Something was very, very wrong at approximately 10 a.m. The Ertl family contacted the Meeker County Sheriff's Office to file a missing persons report. The investigation began immediately. Meeker County Sheriff Brian Cruz and his deputies began canvassing the Watkins area, searching for any sign of Alayna or Anderson or the missing truck. They went door to door. They checked businesses. They searched the streets and fields surrounding the town. They found nothing at 11:15 a.m. Recognizing that this case was beyond the resources of a small county sheriff's office, Cruz contacted the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension to request assistance. The BCA immediately dispatched agents to assist with the investigation. BCA agents and sheriff's deputies expanded the canvassing efforts. They reviewed surveillance footage from local businesses, hoping to catch a glimpse of the white GMC Sierra, hoping to track Anderson's movements. They found nothing. Meanwhile, investigators worked with cell phone providers, trying to locate Matt Ertl's phone, which was presumably still in the stolen truck. They were able to get periodic pings showing the phone's approximate location. The data showed that Anderson had traveled north through Todd County. The signal had been detected around 6:30 a.m., placing Anderson roughly halfway between Watkins and his family's cabin near Motley. But by the time investigators were tracking the phone, the signal had gone cold. Either the phone had died, or it had been turned off or destroyed. The clock was ticking, and a 5-year-old girl was missing at 1:12 p.m. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension issued an Amber Alert for Alayna Ertl. The alert described her as a white female, 5 years old, with blonde hair and blue eyes. It noted that she was last seen wearing pajamas and was believed to be in the company of Zachary Todd Anderson, 25 years old. The alert identified the vehicle as a white 2002 GMC Sierra with Minnesota plates 107 kmt. The Amber Alert went out across the state through television and radio, through electronic highway signs, through cell phone notifications. Millions of Minnesotans received the alert and began watching for signs of the missing girl. But by the time the alert was issued, Alayna Ertl was already dead. The break in the case came from an unexpected source at approximately 1:58 p.m. The Cass County Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center received a phone call. The caller identified himself as Zachary Anderson's father. He said he had seen the Amber Alert. He had recognized his son's name. He believed his son was the subject of the statewide search, and he had crucial information. Earlier that day, Zachary had called him, asking permission to use the family's cabin near Motley. The cabin sat on property the Anderson family owned in rural Cass County, about 80 miles north of Watkins. The father didn't know why his son wanted to use the cabin, didn't know what his son had done. But when he saw the Amber Alert, he put the pieces together, and he made the call that would lead investigators to his son. Anderson's father gave law enforcement permission to enter his property and search the cabin. He was cooperating fully, trying to help whatever his son had done. The father wanted to help find the missing girl. 2 pairs of Cass County Sheriff's deputies responded to the location. The first pair drove to the cabin property several miles down a gravel road from the entrance to Wilderness Park, a collection of small cabins and trailer homes nestled among tall trees. As they approached, they spotted something, the white roof of a truck visible in a ravine at the southwest end of the property. The truck had been driven into the ravine, into a bushy wooded area, in what appeared to be a deliberate attempt to conceal it from view. Only the roof was visible, suggesting that whoever had parked it there wanted it hidden. It was Matt Ertl's GMC Sierra. The vehicle was unoccupied. Deputies approached the cabin due to exigent circumstances concerning the welfare of the child. They made entry without waiting for a warrant. They announced their presence and swept through the cabin, searching for Anderson and Alayna. No one was inside, but what they found chilled them to the bone. On the kitchen table sat a single shot, 20-gauge shotgun with multiple 20-gauge rounds. Spilled about nearby were numerous 12-gauge rounds, but no 12-gauge shotgun. And there on the table, next to the ammunition, was an apparent suicide note with what appeared to be blood on the upper corner. The keys to the stolen GMC Sierra were also on the table. Anderson had been here. He had prepared to kill himself. But something had changed. Something had stopped him. Where was he now? Where was the girl? The second pair of deputies, along with a K-9 unit, began searching the area outside the cabin. They found footprints leading away from the structure into the woods. The K-9 followed the trail through the trees into increasingly difficult terrain at approximately 4:24 p.m. Less than 3 hours after Anderson's father had called police, the K-9 officers found their target. Zachary Anderson was standing knee-deep in a swampy area about a quarter-mile from the cabin. His left wrist had been cut, blood seeping into the murky water around him. He was unarmed. He did not attempt to flee. He did not resist arrest. The officers approached, weapons drawn, demanding to know where the girl was. "What girl?" Anderson responded. The officers asked again. "Where is Alayna? Where is the child?" "You took?" Anderson indicated he did not know. He said he did not want to talk, but the officers persisted. They had a missing 5-year-old girl. They had an Amber Alert. They had a father who had just called in a tip. They had a suicide note and a cut wrist. They had a suspect standing in a swamp refusing to answer questions. Eventually, Anderson agreed to cooperate. He walked with officers to the edge of the swamp and pointed in a general direction, indicating that she was over there. Officers followed his direction deeper into the swamp, the water rising around their boots, the vegetation thick and tangled, and there, in the murky water, hidden beneath debris, was a pink blanket. A Princess Elsa blanket, the kind a 5-year-old girl might sleep with every night beneath the blanket. Submerged in the water was Alayna Ertl. She was unclothed, her small body bearing the marks of violence. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy performed by the Ramsey County Medical Examiner confirmed what investigators already knew and revealed horrors they had feared. Alayna Ertl had died of homicidal violence, specifically strangulation. There was evidence of blunt force trauma to her head, suggesting she had been struck, and there was evidence of sexual assault, including sexual penetration. A 5-year-old girl had been abducted from her bed, raped, beaten, and strangled to death. Her body hidden in a swamp covered with debris and water, as if she were garbage to be disposed of. The forensic examination painted a picture of the final hours of Alayna's life that no parent should ever have to imagine. She had been taken from her bed by a man she probably recognized, a friend of her father's, someone who had been in their house before, someone she had no reason to fear. She had been driven 80 miles in her father's truck through the Minnesota night to a remote cabin in the woods, and there, in that isolated place, Zachary Anderson had done unspeakable things to a child who had never shown anything but kindness and trust to the world around her. The time of death could not be precisely determined, but based on the timeline of events, investigators believed Alayna had been killed sometime in the early morning hours, likely before sunrise, by the time her parents discovered she was missing, by the time the Amber Alert was issued, by the time Anderson's father called the police. Alayna was already gone. There was nothing anyone could have done to save her. Zachary Todd Anderson was transported to the Crow Wing County Jail, where he was held on probable cause for murder and kidnapping on Tuesday, August 23, 2016. He was formally charged in Cass County District Court. The charges were devastating in their scope: second-degree murder, first-degree criminal sexual conduct, kidnapping, and theft of a motor vehicle. That prosecutors detailed the evidence against Anderson: his presence at the Ertl home, his departure with the child in the stolen truck, his suicide note, his statements to police, his direction to the location of Alayna's body bale, was set at $2 million without conditions, or $1 million with conditions, at his initial court appearance. Anderson said little. His public defender requested time to review the evidence. The judge scheduled the next hearing for October. Anderson was held without bail in October 2016. A grand jury convened to consider the evidence against Zachary Anderson. The grand jury returned an indictment on 19 counts, including 8 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree intentional murder, 4 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 1 count of second-degree criminal sexual conduct, 1 count of theft of a motor vehicle, and 1 count of interference with a dead body, if convicted on all counts. Anderson faced life in prison without the possibility of parole. Anderson pleaded not guilty. His defense attorney filed motions challenging the indictment, arguing that there was insufficient probable cause for the arrest, since some information was obtained after Anderson invoked his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. The motions were denied. A trial was scheduled for April 2018 for nearly 2 years. The Ertl family waited for justice. They attended hearings. They sat in courtrooms. They faced the man who had murdered their daughter. And then on March 3, 2018, everything changed. Anderson's attorneys signaled that their client would plead guilty. There would be no trial, no parade of witnesses, no graphic testimony about what had been done to Alayna. Instead, Zachary Todd Anderson stood before Cass County District Court, Judge Gianna Ostad, and admitted to everything under Minnesota law, Rule 15. A judge cannot accept a guilty plea until the defendant is sworn in, questioned about the case, and understands his rights, and the crime prosecutor Ben Lindstrom and Anderson's attorney Kip Fontaine went through the Rule 15 petition, with Anderson asking him detailed questions about what happened on August 19th and 20 of 2016, and there in open court with Alayna's family watching. Anderson described what he had done. He admitted to kidnapping Alayna from her home in Watkins. He admitted to sexually assaulting her. He admitted to leaving her for dead in Cass County. The courtroom was filled with family members who became emotional. As Anderson spoke, Lindstrom later said the details of what happened to their 5-year-old girl finally confirmed, spoken aloud by the man who had done it. Anderson pleaded guilty to first-degree murder while committing first-degree criminal sexual conduct with sexual penetration under Minnesota law. This crime carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no plea deal. There was no reduced sentence. There was nothing offered in exchange for the guilty plea. Lindstrom later expressed surprise that Anderson took the plea, since there was no incentive to do so. If the case had gone to trial, the result would have been the same. Perhaps Anderson wanted to spare himself the ordeal of trial. Perhaps he wanted to spare his own family. Perhaps in some twisted way, he thought admitting guilt was the right thing to do. Whatever his reasoning, the outcome was the same. Immediately after entering his guilty plea, Zachary Todd Anderson was sentenced to life in prison. Without the possibility of parole, he would never again walk free. Before the sentence was imposed, members of Alayna's family gave victim impact statements. They spoke of their loss of the empty chair at the table of the bedroom that would never again hear a child's laughter, of the kindergarten class that would start without one of its students. Matt Ertl, contacted at his home after the sentencing, said he and his wife had nothing else to say. For now, what could they say? What words could capture what they had lost? what they had endured. Judge Jana Austad addressed the court before imposing sentence. She called Anderson's crime monstrous, beyond human understanding. She acknowledged the profound loss of a child, the devastation inflicted on a family and a community. She expressed hope that Anderson could contribute positively in prison without causing further harm, though it was clear she had little faith in such redemption. Today, we get Justice, Prosecutor Lindstrom said, after the hearing, Zach Anderson has lost, but justice could not bring Alayna back. Nothing could bring her back. The murder of Alayna Ertl devastated the community of Watkins in ways that would take years to process. In the days following the discovery of her body, residents struggled to understand how something so terrible could happen in their town, in their community, in a home they drove past every day. Hundreds gathered for a candlelight vigil on August 23, 2016, outside St. Anthony Catholic Church in Watkins. Perhaps 1,000 people crowded into the space surrounding the church, spilling onto the sidewalks and into the street. They released pink and purple balloons. Alayna's favorite colors. They sang hymns and shared memories of the little girl who had smiled at everyone they held. Candles in the darkness, trying to push back against the evil that had invaded their world. The memorial in front of the Ertl home grew day by day. Stuffed animals and flowers and angel figurines placed there by neighbors and strangers, expressing grief in the only way they knew how. The GoFundMe campaign, launched on August 21, 2016, to help with memorial expenses, had a goal of $10,000. It raised $14,000. In 8 hours by late August, it had exceeded $60,000. Donations coming from across Minnesota and nationwide, people who had never met the Ertls, who had never visited Watkins, who had only seen the Amber Alert, and later the terrible news, felt compelled to help. An account was also established at Farmers State Bank of Watkins, the Alayna Ertl Memorial Fund, allowing local residents to contribute directly. The funeral was held on Friday, August 26, 2016, at St. Anthony Catholic Church, the same church where the vigil had been held 3 days earlier. A standing room only crowd filled the church, spilling into the overhead balcony. Father Aaron Nett delivered the homily. "We must let this change us." He said he acknowledged the senseless violence, the evil act that had taken a child from her family, from her community, from the world, but he insisted that evil would not have the last word. These things do not have the last word ever. He declared, "We must be instruments ourselves of peace." At the funeral's close, the family followed behind the small casket as it was carried from the church. Kayla Ertl gripped her son Carter tightly as they left the church, the two surviving members of what had been a family of 4. Just 1 week before Matt and Kayla did not speak during the funeral. But the funeral pamphlet included a message that seemed to come directly from them. "We love you more than anything, baby girl, and miss you incredibly." It read, "Please watch over us all and be the beautiful angel that you are up in heaven. Dance your heart out, Peanut." Alayna was buried in St. Anthony Catholic Cemetery, near the church where she had been baptized, where her funeral was held, where her family would continue to worship in the years to come. The community hosted a lunch for the family at the Watkins Town Hall after the burial. It was what you do in small towns. You feed people, you gather, you support each other. You try to carry on, but carrying on would prove difficult. Watkins had already endured tragedy in the year before Alayna's murder, just over a month before 2 Watkins teenagers had been killed in a crash involving a drunk driver. One of the victims Zachary Rohrbeck was Alayna's cousin, and just weeks before Alayna's death, a tornado had struck the town seriously. Injuring one person, the tornado had hit the same street where the Ertl family lived. It had been a hard year for a town of fewer than 1,000 people. And now, this the worst tragedy of all. How do you recover from losing a child to violence? How do you rebuild trust in a community where a friend of the family turned out to be a monster? How do you explain to children that sometimes bad things happen to good people for no reason at all? The answers are never easy, and they take years to find. In October 2016, 2 months after Alayna's death, Matt and Kayla Ertl gave their first Us interview. To local media, they spoke of the overwhelming support they had received from the community. They spoke of the gifts and cards from strangers, even from people in other states, pledging to be more patient parents, to not take for granted the time they had with their own children. The Ertls admitted they would struggle trusting new friends moving forward, people that you think that, and that you trust and become your friend. And you have in your home and turn their back on you, and you don't understand it, Kayla said. But they were determined to push on for their son Carter, for their community, for each other. Alayna would have turned 6 on Halloween 2016. Her birthday and her favorite holiday combined, the Ertls refused to let that day pass. Unacknowledged, instead of mourning in private, they helped organize a big community costume party. In Alayna's honor, they wanted to give back to the people of Watkins. For the support they had received, they wanted to celebrate their daughter's life, not just mourn her death. The party became an annual tradition, and it inspired something more. The Ertl family created the Sharing Alayna Ertl's Love Charity. The charity collects donations during the annual Halloween party, typically in the form of toys or money, and then distributes them throughout the year to sick children and families in need. The charity has donated to the St. Cloud Hospital and to local families who had experienced losses of their own. It was a way to transform grief into purpose, to turn Alayna's memory into something that could help others. She was always so giving. Kayla said she would want us to help people. And so they do, year after year, keeping their daughter's memory alive through acts of kindness. Zachary Todd Anderson is currently serving his sentence at a Minnesota state prison. He will spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. He will never be eligible for parole. He will die in prison for what he did to Alayna Ertl. But his imprisonment cannot undo what he did, cannot bring back the child he murdered, cannot erase the trauma he inflicted on a family and a community. The questions that haunted investigators and community members in the days after Alayna's death have never been fully answered. Why did Anderson do it? What triggered him after a decade of apparent normalcy? Was Alayna his first victim after the 2006 incident? Or were there others who never came forward? Anderson has never provided a motive, never explained what drove him to take a sleeping child from her bed. The woman he targeted as a teenager, the one who lived next door to him in Monticello, believes he must have victimized others. It is hard to believe Anderson did not target other women or children in the decade between her incident and the killing of Alayna Ertl. She told reporters, but if there were other victims, they have never come forward. Perhaps they don't know what happened to them. If they were children, perhaps they are too ashamed or afraid to speak. Perhaps they don't realize that the man who hurt them is the same man who murdered Alayna Ertl. We may never know. What we do know is that Zachary Anderson was a predator. a man who presented one face to the world, while hiding another, a man who earned trust and then betrayed it in the most horrific way possible. He was not a stranger or lurking in the shadows. He was a friend. He played softball with his victim's father. He drank beers at the local tavern. He was invited into their home, given a place to sleep, trusted with access to their family, and he repaid that trust by taking their daughter, by violating her, by ending her life. This is perhaps the most terrifying lesson of Alayna's case. The danger is not always from strangers. Sometimes the danger is sitting at your kitchen table. The Ertl family continues to live in Watkins. They continue to attend St. Anthony Catholic Church. They continue to participate in community events. They have found ways to honor. They have found Alayna's memory through the charity, through the annual Halloween celebration, through simply speaking her name and keeping her story alive. Carter Ertl. Alayna's older brother was 8 years old when his sister was murdered. He has grown up in the shadow of that. Tragedy has had to process what happened to his family in ways no child should ever have. To the family has tried to protect him, has tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. But there is no normal after something like this. There is only survival. There is only moving forward. There is only finding reasons to keep going. The people of Watkins have done their best to support the Ertls, have done their best to heal as a community. But the scars remain. There's a wariness now that wasn't there before, a recognition that evil can come from unexpected places, that trust must be earned, not assumed, that the world is not as safe as they once believed. This is the legacy of predators. Like Zachary Anderson, they don't just destroy their victims, they destroy the sense of safety that communities depend on. They make everyone a little more suspicious, a little more cautious, a little more afraid. But they cannot destroy everything. They cannot destroy the love that Alayna's family has for her. They cannot destroy the memories of a little girl who gave the best hugs, who smiled at everyone, who loved animals and princesses and singing. They cannot destroy the goodness that she represented. The horror of what happened to her must never be forgotten, but neither should the life she lived, however brief. Alayna Jean Ertl was born on October 31st, 2010, and died on August 20th, 2016. She was 5 years old. She loved her family. She loved her brother. She loved her community. She deserved to grow up, to go to kindergarten, to make friends, to discover who she was meant to become. Instead, her life was stolen by a man who should never have been trusted. If there is any lesson to be taken from this tragedy, it is this: pay attention to warning, to signs, even when they come from people you think, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, and hold your children close, because you never know how much time you have. Alayna's family has asked that her memory be honored through acts of kindness, through the charity they created in her name, through simply being a little more patient, a little more loving with the children in your own life. We love you more than anything. Baby girl, they wrote, miss you incredibly. Please watch over us all and be the beautiful angel that you are up in heaven. Dance your heart out. Peanuts somewhere. Alayna is dancing somewhere. She is smiling, that smile that never seemed to fade. Somewhere. She is giving the best hugs. She is gone. But she is not forgotten. She will never be forgotten. Let me take you back through this case one more time, because there are details that deserve deeper exploration, elements that illuminate both the horror of what happened and the broader questions this tragedy raises. The timeline of that night deserves careful examination on Friday, August 19, 2016. The River Rats had a softball game, like they did most Friday nights during the summer. Matt Ertl and Zachary Anderson both played. Anderson was a competent player, well liked by his teammates, just another guy on the roster after the game. The team gathered at Riverside Tavern. This was routine. This was what small-town softball teams do. They play, they drink, they socialize, they talk about the game, about their jobs, about their lives. Anderson arrived at the tavern around 10:30 p.m. with Matt and Kayla Ertl. He had 2 beers, over about 2 hours. Not excessive, not unusual, just a normal Friday night. Sometime after midnight, the group began to break up. People heading home to sleep off the evening, Matt and Kayla decided to head home with Anderson, following back at the Ertl house on Meeker Street. The pattern continued. Matt and Anderson kept talking the way men do after a night out, conversation flowing easily. Between friends, the kind of talk that happens at 2 a.m. when you're tired, but not ready to sleep at 2 a.m. Kayla carried Alayna from the couch, where she had fallen asleep, to her bedroom. She tucked her daughter in, made sure her pink Princess Elsa blanket was covering her, kissed her goodnight. Alayna was wearing her pajamas, her blonde hair spread across her pillow. She was 5 years old. She was safe in her own home, surrounded by people who loved her. Or so her mother believed. Matt and Anderson continued talking until approximately 4 a.m. 4 hours of conversation between friends. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming, just 2 guys shooting the breeze. Then Matt went to bed, exhausted. Anderson was expected to sleep on the couch or in a spare room. He had done this before he knew the routine. But sometime after 4 a.m., Zachary Anderson made a decision. We will never know what triggered that decision. Had he been planning this for days, for weeks, for months? Had he been watching Alayna sizing her up, calculating his opportunity? Or was it impulse, a sudden overwhelming urge that he had spent years suppressing, finally breaking free? The criminal justice system does not require motive for conviction. It only requires proof that a crime was committed and that the defendant committed it. But human beings need motive. We need to understand why we need reasons that make sense of senseless acts. Anderson has never explained why he has never given his victim's family any understanding of what drove him to take their daughter. Perhaps there is no explanation. Perhaps the darkness inside him was simply too deep, too twisted to articulate. What we know is what happened, not why. At some point between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m., Anderson went to Alayna's bedroom. He took the sleeping child from her bed. He took her pink blanket with her. He took Matt's keys and Matt's cell phone and Matt's truck, and he drove north into the Minnesota darkness, the drive from Watkins to the Anderson family cabin near Motley is approximately 80 miles, about an hour and a half on rural Minnesota roads. What happened during that drive was Alayna asleep in the beginning, wrapped in her blanket, unaware of the danger she was in. Did she wake up at some point confused and frightened to find herself in a truck with a man she barely knew? Did Anderson say anything to her? Did he try to calm her? Did he threaten her? We will never know. The cell phone data showed that Anderson was in Todd County around 6:30 a.m., roughly halfway between Watkins and Motley. This suggests he was driving at a normal pace. Not racing, not fleeing, just driving through the Minnesota morning. As if nothing was wrong, he arrived at the family cabin sometime before 8 a.m. The cabin sat on rural property several miles down a gravel road near Wilderness Park, a collection of small homes tucked among tall trees. It was isolated, private, No one would hear anything that happened there. The forensic evidence tells us what happened next. Alayna was sexually assaulted. She was struck in the head, causing blunt force trauma. She was strangled to death. She was 5 years old. Her body was taken to a swampy area. A few hundred yards from the cabin, she was submerged in the water. She was covered with debris. Her pink blanket was left nearby, the only marker of where she lay. At some point after the murder, Anderson apparently considered killing himself. He went back to the cabin. He placed a 20-gauge shotgun on the kitchen table. With ammunition, he wrote a suicide note. He cut his left wrist, but he didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he walked out to the swamp, where he had left Alayna's body, and he waited. Was he waiting to die from the wound on his wrist? Was he waiting to be found? Was he simply unable to process what he had done? When officers found him at 4:24 p.m., he was standing knee-deep in the water, his wrist still bleeding his victim, just yards away. "What girl?" he said when they asked about Alayna, as if he could pretend it hadn't happened, as if denial could erase reality. The investigation that followed was thorough, professional, devastating. In its findings, the BCA processed the crime scene with meticulous care, documenting every detail, preserving every piece of evidence. The autopsy confirmed the worst fears and revealed horrors that the family would have to live with forever. The stolen truck was processed for evidence, though it yielded little of evidentiary value. Anderson's statements to police limited, as they were established, his presence, his actions, his guilt. The case against him was airtight. There was no question of who had done this. The only question was what justice would look like. The decision to seek a grand jury indictment rather than proceeding with the initial charges reflected the severity of the crime. A grand jury can hear evidence in private, can issue indictments that carry more weight, can signal to a community that the justice system is taking the case as seriously as it deserves. The 19-count indictment returned in October 2016 made clear that prosecutors intended to pursue the maximum possible consequences. 8 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, 4 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 1 count of second-degree criminal sexual conduct, theft interference with a dead body. The charges were comprehensive, covering every aspect of what Anderson had done. The message was clear. Zachary Anderson would never walk free again. So in the nearly 2 years between the indictment and the guilty plea were agonizing for the Ertl family. They had to attend hearings, had to see the man who murdered their daughter, had to listen to legal arguments about evidence and procedure and constitutional rights. They had to maintain their composure in public while falling apart in private. They had to explain to their son Carter why the man who killed his sister was still alive, while Alayna was not the criminal justice system moves slowly, deliberately, methodically. This is by design. Defendants have rights. Cases must be built properly. Appeals must be foreclosed. Justice must be pursued carefully, but for victims' families. This deliberate pace is torture every day that Anderson lived every day. He ate and slept and breathed. Was a day that Alayna could not. Every delay, every continuance, every legal motion extended the wait for resolution, and there was no guarantee of resolution. Trials can go wrong. Juries can return unexpected verdicts. Evidence can be excluded. Witnesses can fail. The Ertl family had to live with the possibility, however remote, that Anderson might somehow escape the consequences of what he had done. When Anderson finally pleaded guilty on March 2nd, 2018, the relief must have been overwhelming. No trial, no uncertainty, no risk, just admission and punishment. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Anderson would grow old, behind bars, would die in a cell, would never again see the outside world. It was as close to justice as the system could provide. But it wasn't enough. Nothing could be enough. Nothing could bring Alayna back. The questions that remain about this case are troubling. Why did Anderson do it? This is the question that haunts everyone who hears this story. Anderson had apparently controlled his predatory urges for 10 years after the incident with his neighbor in 2006. He had functioned in society, had held jobs, had maintained friendships, had presented as normal. What changed? Was there something about Alayna specifically that triggered him? Was there something about the circumstances of that night, the late hour, the alcohol, the opportunity that lowered his inhibitions? Or had he been planning this for a long time, waiting for the right moment, studying the Ertl family, learning their patterns? We will likely never know. Anderson has not provided answers, has not explained his motives, has not offered any insight into what drove him. Perhaps he doesn't know himself. Perhaps the darkness inside him is simply beyond explanation. Were there other victims? This question haunts the woman Anderson targeted as a teenager. She finds it hard to believe that Anderson went 10 years between her assault and Alayna's murder without victimizing anyone else. Predators typically escalate over time, their crimes becoming more frequent, more severe, more violent. The pattern with Anderson seems inconsistent. One incident at 15. Nothing for a decade. Then a murder. Either Anderson had extraordinary self-control, or there were other victims who never came forward. If you experienced something with Zachary Anderson, if you were victimized by him in the years between 2006 and 2016, please consider coming forward. Your testimony might not change his sentence. He's already serving life without parole, but it might help you process what happened. It might help investigators understand the full scope of his crimes. It might help other survivors feel less alone. Could this have been prevented? This is the most painful question of all. If Anderson's juvenile record had not been sealed, would the Ertl family have known to be wary of him? If there had been a system to track juvenile offenders who showed signs of predatory behavior, would Anderson have been monitored more closely if someone had noticed warning signs in the decade between 2006 and 2016? Could they have intervened before Alayna was killed? These questions have no easy answers. The juvenile justice system is designed to give young offenders second chances, to allow for rehabilitation, to recognize that teenagers are not fully formed adults. This is generally good policy. Most juvenile offenders do not go on to commit serious adult crimes, but some do. Some, like Zachary Anderson, carry their predatory nature into adulthood, becoming more dangerous, not less. How do we identify those individuals? How do we protect potential victims without destroying the rehabilitation-focused juvenile justice system? These are questions that policymakers and criminal justice experts continue to wrestle with. Alayna's case did not result in major legislative changes, did not trigger reforms to the juvenile justice system. Perhaps it should have. Perhaps her death should have prompted a conversation about how we balance rehabilitation with public safety. Instead, it became another statistic, another tragedy, another case where warning signs were missed and a child paid the price. The legacy of Alayna Ertl extends beyond her murder, beyond the trial, beyond the imprisonment of her killer. It lives in the charity her family created, in the children, helped by donations, collected at the annual Halloween party. It lives in the community of Watkins, which came together in grief and emerged more connected, more caring, more determined to support each other. It lives in the parents across Minnesota who saw the Amber Alert, who held their own children a little tighter, who promised themselves they would never take for granted the time they had. It lives in the conversations about trust, about safety, about the monsters who hide among us wearing friendly faces. Alayna was 5 years old. She loved princesses and animals, and singing she gave the best hugs. She was taken from the world far too soon by a man who should never have been trusted. We cannot bring her back. We cannot undo what was done. But we can remember her. We can honor her memory through kindness, through vigilance, through love. We can tell her story so that others might learn from it, might protect their own children, might recognize the warning signs we missed. This is her legacy. This is what remains: a little girl with a smile that never faded, a family that found purpose in grief, a community that refused to be defined by tragedy, and a story that demands to be told if you have information about Zachary Anderson, if you were victimized by him, if you know of other crimes he may have committed. Please contact law enforcement. Every piece of the puzzle matters. Every truth brought to light honors Alayna's memory. Alayna Jean Ertl, October 31, 2010 to August 20th, 2016. Dance your heart out, Peanut. Thanks for being here and listening. Don't forget to hit the bell for our latest stories. Stay safe and take care with your loved ones. The role of technology in this investigation deserves examination, both its successes and its limitations. When the Ertl family first realized Alayna was missing, they had one crucial advantage. Matt's cell phone was in the stolen truck. Investigators immediately contacted the cell phone provider, attempting to track the phone's location through cell tower pings. This technology has become a crucial tool in missing persons investigations. The ability to track a phone's approximate location can help narrow search areas, can provide clues about a suspect's direction of travel. In Alayna's case, the cell phone data showed that Anderson had traveled north through Todd County around 6:30 a.m. This told investigators he was heading away from the Twin Cities metro area toward more rural areas. But the technology had limitations. The phone signal was lost at some point, either because the phone died, was turned off, or was destroyed by the time investigators were actively tracking the phone. Anderson had already reached his destination, had already committed his crime. The cell phone data provided valuable information, but it came too late to save Alayna. Surveillance footage from local businesses was also reviewed in the early hours of the search. Investigators hoped to catch a glimpse of the white GMC Sierra, hoped to track Anderson's movements through Watkins and beyond, but the footage yielded nothing useful. Our small towns don't have comprehensive camera coverage the way cities do. There are gaps, blind spots, areas where someone can move unseen. Anderson apparently knew how to avoid detection, or simply got lucky. Either way, the surveillance footage provided no leads. The break in the case came not from technology, but from human connection. Anderson's father saw, the Amber Alert recognized his son's name, remembered that his son had called earlier that day, asking to use the family cabin, and he picked up the phone and called police. This is often how cases are solved, not through forensic wizardry or digital surveillance, but through people coming forward, people doing the right thing, people putting the needs of victims above loyalty to family or friends. Anderson's father made an impossible choice that day. He helped police find his own son, knowing that his son would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. We don't know what that conversation was like. Don't know how the father processed the knowledge that his son had murdered a child, but we know he did the right thing. He called the police. He gave them permission to search his property. He helped them find Alayna's body. Without that phone call, without that cooperation, the investigation might have taken much longer. Alayna's body might not have been found for days or weeks. The evidence might have degraded. The case might it have been harder to prove. Anderson's father will live with what his son did for the rest of his life. Will carry that burden. Will wonder what he could have done differently, what warning signs he missed, what failure in parenting led to this outcome. We should not forget that the families of perpetrators suffer too. They did not choose what their family members did. They did not condone it. They are often blindsided by the evil that lurked within someone they loved. The Amber Alert system that played such a crucial role in this case deserves discussion. The system was developed in the 1990s. Following the abduction and murder of Amber Hagerman, a 9-year-old girl in Texas, it was designed to rapidly disseminate information about abducted children using broadcast media, electronic highway signs, and more recently, cell phone notifications. The criteria for issuing an Amber Alert vary by state, but generally require confirmation that an abduction has occurred, evidence that the child is in imminent danger, sufficient descriptive information about the child and/or suspect to help the public assist in locating them. In Alayna's case, there was some criticism about the time it took to issue the alert. The family reported Alayna missing around 10 a.m. The Amber Alert was issued at 1:12 p.m., 3 hours. In cases involving child abduction, 3 hours can be the difference between life and death. Meeker County Sheriff Brian Cruz defended the timing, explaining that the Amber Alert must be issued through the Minnesota Crime Alert Network, and only after certain criteria are met. He contacted the BCA at 10:30 a.m. to start the process. The alert was issued at 1:12 p.m. The system worked as designed, but the design requires verification, requires process, requires time, and in Alayna's case, that time made no difference. She was already dead before her parents even realized. She was missing the alert. Helped locate Anderson's father, who then provided the tip that led to Anderson's arrest, but it could not save Alayna's life. Should the criteria be loosened? Should alerts be issued faster? Should the process be streamlined? These are difficult questions. Issuing too many alerts can lead to alert fatigue. The public stops paying attention, stops taking the notifications seriously. False alarms waste resources and can harm innocent people who are incorrectly identified as suspects. The system tries to balance speed against accuracy, urgency, against reliability. But when a child dies because the system moved too slowly, that balance feels terribly wrong. The psychological impact on first responders in cases like this is often overlooked. The officers who found Alayna's body in that swamp will carry that image forever. The investigators who processed the crime scene, who documented the evidence of what had been done to a 5-year-old girl, will never forget what they saw. The K-9 handlers, whose dogs led them to Anderson standing in the water, will remember that moment for the rest of their careers. First responders are trained to compartmentalize to do their jobs without letting emotion interfere. But they are human. They have children of their own. They have nieces and nephews. They have neighbors' kids who look just like Alayna when they go home at night, when they close their eyes, when they try to sleep. The images come back. Many first responders develop PTSD from exposure to traumatic scenes. Some turn to alcohol or drugs to cope. Some leave the profession unable to continue seeing the worst of what humans do to each other. We ask these men and women to run toward danger, to face horror, to protect and serve. We should remember to take care of them in return. Sheriff Brian Cruz spoke to reporters after Alayna's body was found. We did everything we could today to try to find her safely. And obviously that didn't happen. He said, and I know that doesn't compare to what the family's going through, but we felt we did everything we possibly could. You can hear in those words the weight that law enforcement carries when a case ends badly. They did everything, right? Followed every protocol, used every resource, and a child still died. That's not failure on their part. That's the reality of evil in the world. Sometimes it wins. Despite our best efforts, the community of Watkins continues to heal, continues to grow, continues to live, but the scars remain. The Ertl family home on Meeker Street still stands a stone's throw from St. Anthony Catholic Church, where Alayna's funeral was held, where the candlelight vigil drew hundreds of mourners. The memorial that grew in front of the house in the days after Alayna's death has long since been cleared away. But the memory persists. Neighbors still think about the little girl who used to ride her bike on the sidewalk, who used to swing a hula hoop, who used to follow her older cousin around the kindergarten. Teachers who were supposed to have Alayna in their class that fall still think about the empty seat that was never filled. The community's sense of safety was shattered, and while it has been rebuilt, it will never be quite the same. This is what predators do. They don't just destroy individual lives, they destroy the trust that holds communities together. Watkins was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where children played outside without supervision, where everybody knew everybody and looked out for each other. It may never be quite that innocent again, but the community has refused to let tragedy define them. They come together every Halloween for the celebration that began as a birthday party for a girl who never got to turn 6. They support the charity that bears Alayna's name, that helps sick children and grieving families. They tell stories about the little girl who gave the best hugs they remember, and in remembering they honor her. Alayna Ertl. She was born on Halloween, which seems fitting. Somehow, a day when we dress up as monsters, when we pretend that evil is just make-believe, when children go door to door, trusting that strangers will give them candy, not harm them. Alayna would have loved Halloween. That year would have loved her birthday party, would have dressed up as a princess, probably would have collected more candy than she could eat. Instead, her birthday became a memorial. Her name became synonymous with tragedy. Her short life became a cautionary tale. But she was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a neighbor. She was a little girl who loved animals and singing and princesses. She was a peanut who gave the best hugs she deserved better. They all do, every child. Taken by violence, every family shattered by loss, every community scarred by tragedy. They all deserved better. We cannot change what happened to Alayna, but we can learn from it. We can watch for warning signs in the people around us. We can teach our children about safety. Without destroying their innocence, we can support families who suffer loss. We can demand better from our systems, better tracking of offenders, better response, times for alerts, better protection for the vulnerable. And we can remember, we can say their names. Alayna Ertl, October 31, 2010 to August 20, 2016. 5 years old, loved by everyone who knew her, taken too soon, never forgotten. There is hope. But we must protect our children. We must be vigilant. We must remember what happens when we let our guard down. Dance your heart out, Peanut. We'll never stop missing you. Thanks for being here and listening. Don't forget to hit the bell for our latest stories. Stay safe and take care with your loved ones.